Chapter 4, A Special Son. The account of the change in Jacob's name occurs in chapter 32 of the book of Genesis. The story of Joseph begins 5 chapters later, when he is 17 years of age and occupies virtually all the remainder of the book. Jacob, we are told, loved Joseph more than he loved any of his other sons and made a richly omitted role for him. His half-brothers hated Joseph because of his favoritism, and they hated him even more when he related a dream he had. We were binding sheaves of corn in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed low to it, he explained. Do you think one day you will lord it over us? The angry brothers asked. Then Joseph had a second dream, which he related to his father as well as his brothers. I had another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. It served to fuel the brothers' jealousy, and Jacob rebuked Joseph, saying, What is this dream of yours? Must your mother and I, your brothers, come and bow down to the ground before you? Yet he did not forget what Joseph had said. The early stories of the patriarch were kept alive in the memory of Hebrew generations. Joseph's brothers must therefore have been aware of the birthright their father had bought from their uncle Esau. And even if they, too, did not really believe that a member of the family would rule one day over the land between the Nile and the Euphrates, must have further resented their father's favorable treatment of Joseph on the grounds that it suggested the birthright was being passed on to him. Joseph was at home with his father one day while the brothers were supposedly grazing their sheep near Shechem. Jacob said to him, Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the sheep, and bring word back to me. Joseph set off, but on arriving at Shechem could find no trace of his brothers and their sheep. A stranger told him they had moved on from here. I heard them say, Let's go down to Dothan. Joseph went after them. And when they saw him approaching in the distance, they said to each other, Here comes the dreamer. Let's kill him and throw him to one of these pits and say that a wild animal devoured him. And we'll see what comes of his dreams. Reuben, the eldest of the brothers, protested. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. When Joseph arrived on the scene, the brothers stripped him of his richly ornamented robe and threw him into an empty pit before sitting down to eat their meal. The ultimate outcome of the situation does not seem to have been decided until later, when they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites, their camels laden with spices, balm, and myrrh, who were making their way down to Egypt on a trade mission. Judah, the fourth brother, said to the others, What shall we gain if we kill our brother and conceal his death? Why not sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him? After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. The rest of the brothers, apart from Reuben, who was not present at the precise moment, agreed. They pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the merchants for 20 shekels of silver. What can I do now? Reuben asked when he returned and found that Joseph was missing. The remaining brothers were equal to the situation. They slaughtered a goat and dipped Joseph's robe in the animal's blood before taking it home to Jacob, who recognized it. It is my son's robe, he said. Some wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. Jacob went for the best-loved son, wept for his best-loved son, who, unknown to him, was on his way to Egypt, where the Ishmaelites merchants sold him to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. Chapter 38 of the book of Genesis is devoted to an account of Judah's marriage and the events that led to the founding of the messianic line of King David. But with the next chapter, we are back with Joseph in Egypt, where at the start, everything went well with him. Potiphar found him to be a faithful servant and entrusted to him everything he owned. However, Joseph was not only efficient, but handsome. And after a while, Potiphar's wife took notice of him and said, "Come to bed with me." Joseph rejected her invitation. "Think of my master," he told her. "With me in charge, he does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns has been entrusted to my care. No one is greater in his house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Potiphar's wife was not prepared to take no for an answer. She continued to entreat Joseph to take her to bed, and he continued to refuse. Eventually, there came a day when he found himself alone in the house with her. She caught him by the cloak and pleaded again, "Come and lie with me." But Joseph still refused and ran out of the house, leaving his cloak in her hand. Then followed what we may assume was not the first, and certainly was not the last case of vengeful behavior by a woman scorned. Potiphar's wife told her other servants that Joseph had attacked her and ran out of the house when she screamed. She kept his cloak and repeated the same story to her husband when he arrived home. "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make a mockery of me, but as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak in my hand and ran out of the house." Potiphar, who believed her, was understandably outraged and promptly incarcerated Joseph in the jail where all the king's prisoners were kept. Joseph proved such a model prisoner that he was soon running the internal affairs of the prison, much as he had run Potiphar's home. It was thus that he met Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, the chief baker, when they gave offense to the king and found themselves locked up in the same prison. After they had been there for some time, each had a disturbing dream. They looked dejected when Joseph had come upon them the next morning. "Why do you look so downcast today?" he asked. "We both had dreams, but there is no one to interpret them," they explained. Joseph answered, "Does not interpretation belong to God? Tell me your dream." The chief cupbearer said, "In my dreams I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and it clustered, ripened into grapes. I had Pharaoh's cup in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand." "This is what it means," Joseph told him. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will raise your head and restore you to your position. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Bring my case to Pharaoh's notice and get me out of prison. For I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in this dungeon." The chief baker then recounted history. "On my head were 3 baskets of white bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." Joseph's interpretation of the second dream was less encouraging. "This is what it means," he said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will behead you and hang your body on a tree, and 3 birds will eat away all your flesh." The 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, And as Joseph had predicted, he restored the cupbearer to his former position as part of the festivities. But as Joseph had also foretold, the chief baker was executed. In a commonplace act of ingratitude, however, the cupbearer forgot to mention Joseph to Pharaoh. He did not think of him until 2 years later, when Pharaoh himself had 2 mysterious dreams that none of the magicians or wise men of Egypt could interpret for him. Reminded by these circumstances of his own earlier predicament, the cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker. Each of us had a dream that night, and each needed its own interpretation. Now a young servant was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream, and things turned out exactly as he had interpreted them to us." Pharaoh sent at once for Joseph, who, as soon as he had shaved and changed his clothes, presented himself before the king. Pharaoh explained, "I have a dream, and no one can interpret it. I have heard it said that you can understand and interpret dreams. I cannot do it, but God will. Pharaoh the answer he desires. Will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." In my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when out of the river there came 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. Pharaoh went on. After them appeared 7 other cows, scrawny and very gaunt and lean. These lean, gaunt cows ate up the 7 fat ones, but even after they ate them, no one could tell that they had done so. They looked as gaunt as before. In my dreams, I also saw 7 ears of corn, full and good, growing on single stalk. After them, seven other ears sprouted, withered and thin, and blighted by the east wind. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. I told this to the magicians, and no one can explain it to me. The dreams of Pharaoh are one of the same, Joseph told the king. God has told Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears of corn are 7 years. The 7 lean, gaunt cows are 7 years, and are also worthless, and so are the worthless ears of corn blighted by the east wind. 7 years of plenty are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. Now let Pharaoh look at a shrewd and wise man and put him in charge of the country. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. To Pharaoh and all his officials the plan seemed a sensible one. And he said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one shrewd and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my household, and all my people are to be submitted to your orders. Only in respect of the throne shall I be greater than you." Pharaoh took the signet ring from his own hand and placed it on Joseph's finger. He also dressed him in a robe of fine linen, put a gold chain around his neck, and arranged for Joseph to ride in a chariot as his second in command. Men shouted before him, bowed the knee. In addition, the king gave him an Egyptian name, Zapnath Padni, as well as an Egyptian wife, Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On or Heliopolis, the center in Lower Egypt of the worship of the sun god Ra. Joseph was 30 when he entered Pharaoh's service, and during the 7 good years he traveled throughout Egypt, storing grain, a against the lean years to come. He also became the father of two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Then came the years of predicted famine, which affected many countries, including Canaan, where Jacob said when Jacob said to his sons, I've heard that there is corn in Egypt. Go down there and buy some so that we don't have to starve. The brothers set off, leaving behind only Benjamin, a second child, who had been born to Rachel after Joseph. Joseph recognized his brothers as soon as he saw them, but he concealed his identity and spoke harshly to them through an interpreter. Where do you come from? He asked. From the land of Canaan to buy food, they replied. You are spies, said Joseph. You have come to spy on the weakness of our defense. The brothers denied the charges and explained, Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father in Canaan, and one is no more. Although he knew their words to be true, except that his own case, he was still very much alive. Joseph locked the brothers up for 3 days. At the end of that time, he said to them, If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison while the rest of you take corn back to your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me so that your words may be verified, that you may not die. Unless your youngest brother comes here, as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place. Simeon was the brothers chosen to stay behind. Joseph had the sacks of the others filled with grain, but he refused to let them pay for it, and without their knowledge placed the silver in their sacks as well. He also gave them provisions for their journey, and they set out for Canaan with their laden donkeys. When they arrived home and their father Jacob heard the story of their adventures, he was at first reluctant to let them return to Egypt with Benjamin, who had clearly replaced Joseph as his favorite son. My son will not go down there with you, he said. Joseph is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm comes to him, you will bring my gray hairs down to the grave in sorrow. The famine continued to rage. However, and when all the grain was gone, Jacob changed his mind. If it must be done, then do this, he said. Take some of the produce for you, which our country is famous, a little balm, a little honey, some spices and myrrh, some pistachio nuts, almonds, and take them with you as a gift. Take double the amount of silver with you, for you must return the silver that was put back in the mouths of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your other brother also and go back to the man at once. And may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother Simeon and Benjamin come back with you. When the brothers arrived in Egypt for the second time and Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to his steward, Take these men to my house and slaughter an animal. They are to eat with me at noon. At the house they are given water to wash their feet and fodder for their donkeys, and afterwards they prepared their gifts in readiness for Joseph's appearance. Once the gifts had been presented, Joseph asked, How is your aged father you have told me about? Is he still living? They answered, Your servant, our father, is still alive and well. Turning to Benjamin, Joseph inquired, Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about? And added, God be gracious to you, my son. Deeply moved at the sight of his own mother's son, whom he had not seen for so many years, Joseph hurried out of his own private room to weep. Later, after he had washed his face, he came out and, controlling himself, served the food. In terms of the seating arrangement, the meal could not be described as exactly convivial. Joseph ate alone, and the Egyptians present ate. Joseph ate alone, and the other Egyptians present ate apart from the brothers, because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for that is detestable to Egyptians. By the time the brothers were ready to depart, Joseph had hatched a plot designed to ensure that Benjamin would have to stay behind in Egypt. He told his stewards, "Fill the man's sack with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. Then put my goblet, the silver one, at the top of the youngest one's sack." The brothers had barely started out for Canaan again when Joseph sent his steward in pursuit, armed with the accusation that one of them had stolen his silver cup. They denied the theft, but when the goblet was found in Benjamin's stack, they reloaded their donkeys and returned to the city to be confronted by Joseph. "What can we say?" asked Judah despairingly. "How can we prove our innocence? We are now our Lord's slaves, we ourselves as well as the one who was found with the goblet." Joseph replied that he would not be so harsh, only the one found with the goblet will become my slave. The rest of you can go back to your father in peace. Judah pleaded with him to change his mind, explaining, "My father said to us, 'You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One of them left me, and I said, he has surely been torn to pieces. If you take this one too from me, the harm comes to him. You will bring gray hairs down to the grave in sorrow. Please let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in the place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers." Joseph was touched by his voluntary act of self-sacrifice that he decided to reveal himself at last to his brothers. "Come close to me," he said, and when they approached him, went on, "I am your brother Joseph that you once sold into Egypt, and now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was God who sent me ahead of you to save your lives. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made a father to Pharaoh. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, Lord over all his household and the ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and tell him, this is what your son Joseph said. God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me. You, your sons and grandsons, your flocks, your herds, and all of you shall have. I shall provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Then Pharaoh heard that Joseph's brothers were in Egypt. He said to him, tell your brothers, load your animals and go back to Canaan, and bring your father and families back to me. I shall give you the best land in Egypt. You are also directed to tell them, take some wagons from Egypt for your children and wives, and get your father and come. Jacob, or Israel, to use the new name he had been given so many years before, was stunned to hear that his long-lost son Joseph was still alive, and did not really believe it until he heard all the details and seen the carts that Pharaoh had sent. He gathered together his entire family, nearly 70 souls in all, and set out for Egypt. Joseph drove out in his chariot to meet them, and after an emotional reunion, Joseph said to him, now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive. Joseph settled all his family in the Goshen district of Ramesses, and introduced his father and 5 of his brothers to Pharaoh, who told Joseph, if you know of any capable men among them, make them chief herdsmen over my cattle. They had lived there for 17 years when Jacob, who felt that the time of his death was approaching, sent for Joseph and said to him, do not bury me in Egypt, but when I die, carry me out of Egypt and bury me where my forefathers are buried. I shall do as you asked, Joseph promised. Swear to me, his father said. Joseph swore to him. Sometime later, Joseph learned that his father was ill and went to visit him, accompanied by his own 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. There, then, followed another curious incident. The two sons went close to their grandfather to receive his blessing. Ephraim the younger standing on the right in reach of his left hand, and Manasseh the elder standing on the left in reach of his right hand. However, Jacob crossed his hands and put his right hand on Ephraim's head, and Joseph was displeased by his departure from normal custom. So he took hold of his father's right hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh, saying, This one is the elder, put your right hand on his head. Jacob refused, saying, I know my son, I know. He too will become a great people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will be a whole nation in themselves. The Old Testament offers no explanation for this strange exchange. The meaning of Jacob's words, or rather his promise, was never fulfilled. When Jacob eventually died, Joseph gave orders for him to be embalmed, and after 70 days of mourning, asked permission to take his father's body back to Canaan for burial. Pharaoh granted his request. It was an impressive caravan that set out for Canaan with all the adults from Joseph's and his brothers' families, all the dignitaries of Egypt, chariots and horsemen. On their subsequent return to Egypt, however, Joseph's brothers feared that with their father dead, Joseph would take revenge on them for selling them into slavery, saying, Your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers. Crime. I know they did you harm. Joseph gave them this reassurance. Don't be afraid, he told them. Am I in place of God? You intended to harm me, but God meant to bring me out of it to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So don't be afraid. I shall provide for you and your children. Immediately after that, we come to an account of Joseph's own death. There is no indication of how much time had elapsed since the death of his father, but we are told that he saw the third generation of Ephraim's children. Also, the children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were placed at birth on Joseph's knees. Before he died, Joseph foretold the Exodus. But God will not fail to come to aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Joseph. Joseph also made the sons of Israel themselves swear an oath. When God comes to aid, you must take my bones with you from here. The book of Genesis ends with his death, so Joseph died at the age of 110. And after they embalmed him, he was laid in a coffin in Egypt. To summarize the views accepted by scholars about the way the Joseph story has come down to us, there was an original narration which was put down in writing about the 9th century BC and is thought to be the Judah-Israel version. About a century later, there came a second story believed to be the Reuben-Jacob version. The story of Joseph in the book of Genesis comes mainly from these two sources. However, after returning from their Babylon exile, the priests who arranged the sources made some additions of their own that included Joseph's age at the time he entered the service of Pharaoh, the number of tribes who went down to join in Egypt, the length of sojourn, and Joseph's request to be buried in Canaan. Then came the editor who, sometime before the 2nd century BC, took on the task of making one story from these three sources, and furthermore was responsible for the section dealing with Joseph's death and his request to be reburied in Canaan. Now that brings us to an end of chapter 4. Please reappear with us soon when we read chapter 5. Thank you for coming out. God bless you. Good night. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. You heard?